Lightning split the sky, tearing the night into jagged shards of silver. The wind carried screams, not of people, but of the land itself, dry, thirsty, and angry. Ethan Granger stumbled through the wreckage of what had once been his home, boots sinking into the scorched dirt, his fingers clutching the remnants of a tattered photograph. Somewhere in the shadows, a rifle clicked, warning him he wasn't alone. The town of Dry Creek lay in ruin behind him, its wooden facades splintered like old bones, and the air smelled of smoke, fear, and lost hope. Ethan's throat was dry, but he forced the words out anyway, muttering into the night, "I'm not done yet." A sudden movement caught his eye. A horse, its mane whipped by the storm, pawed at the earth impatiently. Beneath the saddle, bundled in a filthy blanket, a child shivered. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Whoever left this child here, they hadn't counted on him finding her. He knelt, brushing dirt from her small, pale face. She stirred, eyes wide with terror, and whispered a name he would never forget. That single word was a promise, a warning, and the beginning of a journey that would burn through his soul and carve his name into the unforgiving lands of the West. Ethan grabbed the reins, hoisting the child onto the horse before mounting himself. The storm screamed around them, but they moved as one, cutting through the night. Every shadow seemed to reach for them, every whisper of wind a threat. The desert stretched endlessly, black and merciless, yet Ethan's mind was fixed on one thing: survival. Somewhere ahead, he hoped, was safety. Somewhere ahead, he hoped, lay justice. And somewhere ahead, he hoped, lay answers he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. Hours bled into the night, the horse's hooves pounding the dry earth like a war drum. Ethan's muscles ached, but he ignored the pain. Every step forward was a step away from the horrors he'd left behind. Yet every step forward dragged memories of them along. The child slept fitfully, trembling against his chest. Her small hand grasped his coat, her nails digging into fabric like anchors holding her to the only person she trusted. Ethan whispered promises he barely believed himself. "I won't let them hurt you. Not now, not ever." The wind shifted, carrying distant voices, rough and menacing. Bandits, raiders, or worse. Ethan didn't pause. He spurred the horse into a desperate gallop, chest tight with fear, eyes scanning the horizon for shelter. A flicker of movement on a ridge caught his attention. A figure cloaked in shadow seemed to be waiting. Ethan's heart thudded. Friend or foe? He couldn't tell. The figure raised a hand, and a small lantern glowed in the night. Relief and suspicion warred inside him. He slowed the horse cautiously, approaching the light. The figure stepped forward, revealing a woman, tall and lean, her eyes sharp and wary. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said, voice low but firm. Ethan adjusted the child in his arms, nodding. "Neither should you," he replied. She glanced at the child, then back at him, assessing. "You need shelter. There's a cabin not far from here. Come with me if you want to live through the night." Ethan didn't hesitate. The storm raged around them as they moved toward the faint glow of a distant cabin. Every sound, crackling thunder, snapping branches, distant animal cries, made his heart jump. But in that fragile human connection, a spark of hope kindled. They reached the cabin, battered by the wind but standing firm against the storm. The woman ushered them inside, closing the door against the howl of the desert. The warmth inside was a shock. A small fire burned in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough wooden walls. Ethan laid the child down gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She sighed in sleep, finally at peace. The woman watched silently, her eyes reflecting both suspicion and empathy. Ethan sank into a chair, exhaustion pressing down like a physical weight. He didn't speak. Words felt meaningless in the aftermath of so much chaos. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, for the first time in days, he allowed himself a small measure of calm. Yet he knew the calm was temporary. The West was not forgiving. It demanded courage, demanded choices, demanded sacrifices. And Ethan Granger had no choice but to answer the call. The wind beat against the cabin walls, carrying with it a whisper of the future. A future shaped by danger, loyalty, betrayal, and the faint, flickering hope that even in the darkest corners, miracles could be found. Ethan clenched his fists. He had survived this far, but the path ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The child stirred, eyes fluttering open. Ethan smiled faintly, a small, fragile thing in a world of pain. "We're going to be okay," he murmured. But even as he spoke, he knew the West would not give them mercy freely. And somewhere out there, a shadow waited, hungry, patient, and unrelenting. Ethan leaned back against the cabin wall, listening to the storm's echoes fading into the distance. Each crack of thunder earlier had been a warning. Now silence pressed in, heavy and expectant. Clara moved quietly around the room, stacking wood and tending the fire, her eyes sharp, unyielding. Yet there was a flicker of something softer, curiosity, maybe trust. "Name's Clara," she said finally, voice rough but steady, carrying a strength that reminded Ethan there were still people in this world who could endure. "You can't stay here forever." Ethan tightened his grip on the child's hand. "I know," he said, voice hoarse, "but I have to get her to safety. Someone's after us, someone who won't stop." Clara's gaze hardened, studying him as if she could see through the scars he carried, both visible and invisible. "Then you'll need more than courage," she said. "You'll need allies." Ethan swallowed, knowing she was right. The West was a place of harsh truths, a land where trust was as scarce as rain. But he nodded. Morning came slow, dragging its gray light across the battered land. The storm had passed, leaving a world washed clean, but wounded, each shadow sharp against the dirt and stone. Ethan stepped outside, the child cradled in his arms, eyes scanning the horizon. Ruined buildings and broken fences stretched into the distance, silent witnesses to the chaos of days past. Yet beyond the desolation there was a glimmer of hope, the faint promise of life, of answers, of justice waiting to be carved from the unforgiving land. He adjusted the blanket around the child, securing her as best he could, and looked back at Clara. She gave a curt nod, wordless encouragement for the journey ahead. Ethan mounted his horse, chest tight with anticipation, knowing that every mile forward would test him, that the path would be littered with danger and pain. And yet he had no choice but to ride. The first mile passed in tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic pounding of hooves on dry earth. Memories of fire, screams, and loss churned in his mind, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the fragile life in his arms. The child slept, her breath soft against his chest, her small hand clutching his coat like an anchor to hope. The sun climbed higher, relentless, scorching, yet Ethan pressed on. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every movement on the horizon was a potential threat, and his senses sharpened to a fine edge. By midday, he reached a ridge overlooking a valley that seemed impossibly green after the desolation they had crossed. Relief was brief. Smoke rose from the buildings below, curling into the sky like a warning. Men moved among the structures, rifles in hand, faces hidden beneath scarves and hats. Ethan's stomach clenched. They had been followed, or worse, they had been expected. He spurred the horse cautiously, advancing with silent determination, scanning every inch of the valley, every shape that could conceal a threat. And then movement, figures darting between buildings, eyes trained on him, silent and calculating. Ethan's hand hovered near his revolver. The child stirred, waking, sensing tension but trusting the rhythm of his heartbeat. He whispered reassurances she couldn't fully understand yet. The valley was alive with danger, and Ethan knew that to survive he would have to outthink, outrun, and outfight whatever awaited him. But he also knew that retreat was no longer an option. Somewhere beyond the fear, beyond the threats, lay answers. Someone had left this child in peril, and someone would pay. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke, horses, and gunpowder. Ethan tightened his grip, squinting toward the far edge of the valley, where a lone figure moved against the backdrop of shattered buildings. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, watched him approach. Ethan's pulse quickened. Friend or foe? He couldn't tell. Every instinct screamed danger. Every memory whispered caution. Yet he pressed forward, knowing the child's life depended on it. The valley stretched out, each step heavier than the last, the weight of responsibility pressing down like the relentless sun above. Ethan's mind raced with plans, contingencies, escape routes. But there was only one certainty. He would not fail. Not now. Not ever. The man stepped forward, hands raised, revealing a rifle strapped across his back. His eyes met Ethan's, sharp and calculating. "You're far from home, stranger," the man said, voice low, carrying both warning and curiosity. Ethan adjusted the child in his arms, squaring his shoulders. "I'm not lost," he replied. "I know exactly where I'm going." And with that, the first move in a deadly game of survival in the unforgiving West began. Ethan didn't flinch as the man stepped closer, his boots crunching over the dry earth. The child clung tighter to him, sensing the tension in the air, yet trusting his presence. "Who sent you?" Ethan asked, voice steady, though every nerve screamed caution. The man tilted his head, eyes glinting beneath the shadow of his hat. "A man with a score to settle," he said simply. Ethan's jaw tightened. That could mean 100 different things, none of them good. He shifted the child to the other arm, readying his revolver without breaking eye contact. "Then I guess we're about to settle some scores," he replied. The man's lips curved slightly, a smile devoid of warmth. "Maybe," he said, taking a slow step back, "or maybe you'll find yourself 6 feet under before the sun sets." Ethan didn't respond. Words were useless here. Action spoke louder. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of sweat, horses, and gunpowder. Every shadow seemed alive, shifting, watching, waiting. Ethan scanned the ridge, calculating, planning, searching for any advantage. His mind raced through possibilities, escape routes, cover, allies he didn't know he had. The child stirred again, her small hand brushing his cheek. He whispered a soft promise. "I won't let them touch you. Not here. Not ever." The man raised his rifle, a slow, deliberate movement that froze Ethan's blood. He dove behind a jagged rock, pulling the child close. The first shot cracked through the air, kicking dust into Ethan's face. Instinct took over. He rolled, firing in return, the revolver spitting lead with precision born of desperation. The battle was brief, violent, and silent in its own way, the desert swallowing the noise, carrying echoes across the valley. When the dust settled, the man was gone, leaving only footprints and a warning in the dirt. Ethan exhaled slowly, heart hammering. The child clung to him, her small body trembling but alive. He pressed on, moving down the ridge toward the buildings below, every sense alert. The valley was a trap, but it was also a path. Somewhere beyond, answers waited. Somewhere beyond, justice could be carved from the chaos. Hours passed, each step a trial, each mile heavier than the last. Ethan moved with purpose, the child tucked securely against him, his eyes scanning every corner, every doorway, every shadow that could conceal danger. He found the first clue in a smoldering cabin, the remnants of fire still warm, the walls scarred by bullets. Papers littered the floor, some singed, some intact, carrying names, places, and threats. He scanned them quickly, memorizing every detail. Someone had left this trail, knowing he would follow, knowing he could not resist protecting the innocent. The child tugged at his coat, pointing at a drawing, a crude sketch of a man on horseback, rifle slung across his back. Ethan recognized the face immediately. His pulse quickened. The enemy was closer than he had thought. He gritted his teeth. Every step forward was a step deeper into danger, but retreat was no longer an option. Night fell quickly, dragging shadows across the valley, thick and suffocating. Ethan found temporary shelter in an abandoned barn, barricading the door and starting a small fire. The child slept fitfully, murmuring in her dreams, but he stayed awake, eyes scanning the darkness, ears straining for any sound. The wind carried whispers, voices, movements, hints of men circling. Ethan's hand never left his revolver. Somewhere out there, enemies plotted, shadows moved, and the West itself seemed to conspire against him. Yet he knew he had to survive. For her. For the promise of justice. Dawn broke faintly, pale and gray, illuminating the valley in a soft, deceptive light. Ethan rose, lifting the child, and surveyed the landscape. The enemy was out there, waiting, calculating, and he would have to be smarter, faster, and ruthless to survive. But for the first time since the storm, he felt a flicker of something stronger than fear, determination. The West was cruel, merciless, and unforgiving, but Ethan Granger was not yet finished. Ethan led the child down a narrow path cutting through the valley, rocks jagged underfoot, the air thick with tension and the scent of dust and danger. Every sound echoed, an animal's cry, the rustle of dry leaves, the creak of distant timber, and Ethan flinched at none. He had learned long ago the West punished hesitation. The child's small hand gripped his coat, grounding him, reminding him why he moved forward. He scanned every ridge, every shadow, every nook where an ambush might lie in wait. Hours passed in careful silence, the sun climbing and beating down on them relentlessly. Ethan's throat was dry, lips cracked, but he pressed on, knowing that stopping meant death or worse. Somewhere ahead, he saw smoke rising from a cluster of buildings nestled against a hill. A homestead? Or a trap? He could not afford mistakes. He edged closer, crouching behind rocks, the child shielded in his arms. Men appeared, dark figures moving with calculated precision. Guns gleamed in the morning light, eyes hidden under hats and scarves. Ethan's mind raced, calculating distance, timing, angles, every possibility. He would not be caught unprepared. A shot rang out, ricocheting off stone near his shoulder. He dove, dragging the child with him, heart hammering, ears ringing. Dust and dirt filled his mouth, but he ignored it, focusing on survival. The attackers moved with intent, herding him toward the center of the valley. But Ethan's knowledge of terrain gave him an advantage. Rocks, hollows, and ravines became allies in a deadly dance of survival. Hours turned into a blur of movement. Shots fired, dust kicked into the air, and Ethan pushed forward, relentless, determined, unyielding. At one point, the child cried, fear piercing his resolve like a blade. He whispered promises he barely believed himself, urging her to stay silent, to stay strong. The enemy circled, shadows closing in, yet Ethan found an opening, a narrow passage through which only he and the child could slip. They moved like ghosts, shadows among shadows, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. At the far edge of the valley, a river shimmered in the sunlight, offering a fleeting sense of hope. Ethan splashed through the shallow water, the child clinging to him, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to think they might survive. But the west was never kind. Across the river, more figures emerged, moving with lethal precision, rifles raised, faces hidden. Ethan froze for only a second, calculating, then dove into the brush, pulling the child with him. Bullets kicked up dirt around them, the sound deafening, but he kept moving, each step a gamble, each heartbeat a prayer. Night fell again, and they found temporary shelter in a hollowed-out cave, the walls damp and cold, the smell of earth heavy in the air. Ethan lit a small fire, careful that the glow did not betray their position. The child curled against him, exhausted but awake enough to whisper, "Will they come again?" Ethan held her close, whispering, "Yes, but we'll be ready. We always are." Outside, the sounds of movement persisted, the west restless, unyielding, unforgiving. But inside that small cave, for a fleeting moment, Ethan allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. Somewhere ahead, justice waited. Somewhere ahead, the man who had taken so much from him waited. And Ethan Granger would not rest until the debt was paid, until the innocent were safe, until the West itself remembered that even in darkness, courage burned brighter than fear. Dawn came pale and uncertain, spilling gray light across the valley as Ethan pressed forward, the child snug against his chest, her small fingers gripping his coat. The world smelled of dust, smoke, and the faint coppery tang of blood. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate, for the West had teeth, and it was hungry. Ethan's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for shelter, allies, or enemies. He expected all three. The child murmured in her sleep, the sound fragile against the wind, a reminder of the life he had sworn to protect. He tightened his grip and kept moving, boots crunching over dry stone, heart beating in rhythm with the unforgiving landscape. Hours passed, the sun climbing high, relentless, merciless, scorching everything beneath its gaze. Ethan's throat was parched, lips cracked, but he didn't stop. There was no rest for the hunted, no mercy for those who carried responsibility in a world that demanded none. Ahead, he spotted a ridge, and beyond it, a settlement, or what remained of one. Smoke curled lazily into the sky, a promise of life, a trap, or both. He approached cautiously, the child hidden, eyes sharp, revolver ready. Figures moved among the ruins, rifles glinting in the morning sun. He crouched behind a broken wall, studying their formation. Every instinct screamed danger. Yet he pressed forward, silent as the shadows that stretched across the desert floor. A shout broke the morning stillness. Ethan ducked, rolling behind a boulder, the child clinging tightly, her wide eyes reflecting fear and trust. Bullets kicked up dust around them, and he returned fire, precise, deliberate, controlled. The dance of life and death was brutal, unforgiving, and Ethan moved with the skill born of necessity. As the firefight wore on, he edged closer to the largest building in the center of the ruins, a saloon half collapsed, walls pockmarked with scars of old battles. Inside, he spotted movement, men planning, talking, waiting. He could see the man he had been hunting, the one who had caused this chaos, standing near a window, rifle in hand, watching. Ethan's pulse surged. Every plan, every calculation, every painful memory converged in that moment. He had come too far to fail now. With a sudden burst of courage, he charged. The child pressed safely against him, his revolver spitting fire into the morning. Men scrambled, shouting, returning fire. But Ethan moved with precision, shadows and dust his allies. The child cried out, frightened, and he whispered reassurances she barely understood. Step by step, he carved a path through chaos, each movement measured, each shot purposeful. The man watched, realization dawning in his eyes, but Ethan did not hesitate. This was the moment the West had been shaping him for, the moment he would claim justice, or die trying. The battle moved through the ruins, bullets and dust dancing in the sunlight. Ethan ducked, rolled, fired, and pressed forward, the child never leaving his arms. Finally, he confronted the man, rifle leveled, eyes locked. Silence fell between them, heavy, charged, and full of unspoken words. "It ends now," Ethan said, voice low, steady, carrying all the fury and grief of the past weeks. The man smirked, but it faltered as Ethan's gaze bore into him, unwavering, relentless. The West held its breath. The child's small hand pressed against Ethan's chest, grounding him, reminding him why he fought. And in that silent moment, the scales tipped. Justice, long delayed, found its mark. And the man who had caused so much pain realized the price of crossing Ethan Granger. Outside, the wind whispered through the ruins, carrying away the echoes of gunfire, leaving only the dust, the sun, and the survivor's resolve. Ethan took a deep breath, lifting the child, her eyes wide, still uncertain, yet alive. "We're not safe yet," he murmured, "but we're closer than before." And with that, they pressed onward, the West stretching endlessly before them, cruel, unforgiving, and full of the promise that even in darkness, courage could carve a path to hope. Ethan led the child through narrow paths between the ruins, each step cautious, each shadow a possible threat. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the earth, turning dust into a choking haze. Every sound, wind through broken beams, the distant cry of a hawk, the scuff of rocks underfoot, made him flinch. Yet he pressed forward, never letting fear dictate his pace. The child shifted in his arms, eyes wide, still clinging to him with a desperation that mirrored his own. Hours bled into each other, the valley stretching endlessly, unforgiving, yet he moved with purpose, knowing that every mile forward was a mile closer to survival, closer to answers. Ahead, he spotted smoke rising again, thin and curling, betraying a settlement or camp, perhaps friend, perhaps foe. Ethan froze, scanning every ridge, every hollow, every possible ambush. His revolver rested lightly in his hand, ready. A sudden movement among the shadows, a horse, its rider silent, made him duck instinctively. The figure dismounted, stepping into view. A woman, mid-30s, lean and wiry, eyes sharp and calculating, nodded slightly. "You shouldn't be here alone," she said, voice steady, but carrying the edge of caution. Ethan adjusted the child in his arms, squinting at her. "Neither should you," he replied. She gestured to the valley below. "There's a safe place, a few miles from here, but you'll have to move quickly. They're tracking you." Ethan didn't hesitate. He mounted the horse, the child secure, and followed her guidance, moving through hidden paths and brush that gave them cover from prying eyes. Bullets kicked up dust in the distance, reminders that danger never rested. Night fell, blanketing the valley in darkness, the moon rising thin and pale, casting long shadows across the broken landscape. Ethan found shelter in a shallow cave, hidden from sight, damp and cold, but safe for the moment. He lit a small fire carefully, keeping the glow minimal so as not to betray their location. The child leaned against him, whispering a question he had no simple answer for. "Will they find us?" Ethan tightened his grip, whispering, "They might, but we'll be ready, always." Outside, the wind carried distant shouts and the scent of smoke, the reminder that the West never truly slept, and neither could they. The hours dragged on, Ethan keeping watch, ears straining for every sound, mind racing with plans, contingencies, and memories of loss. He knew the enemy would strike again, sooner or later, but he also knew that he would meet them head-on. Every step he took, every choice he made, was for the child, for justice, for the hope that the West still had room for courage and mercy. By dawn, the valley was alive again, shadows moving, men on horseback patrolling, searching. Ethan rose, adjusting the child, eyes scanning every ridge. He spotted a ridge that led to higher ground, a vantage point, a path that might give them the upper hand. He moved carefully, silently, the child trusting him implicitly. Each step was perilous, yet he pressed forward, never slowing, never hesitating. At the crest he paused, looking down at the valley below. Enemy positions, patrols, sentries, every detail etched in his mind. He whispered to the child, "We'll be safe soon. Keep close. Stay quiet." They descended cautiously, shadows among shadows, dust and debris hiding their passage. Bullets whizzed past at times, but Ethan moved with a deadly precision, instincts honed over years of surviving the merciless West. By mid-morning, they reached a hidden grove, trees thick and lush against the barren desert. For the first time in days, the child smiled faintly. Exhaustion and fear momentarily lifted. Ethan allowed himself a small breath of relief, but knew it was temporary. The West was unforgiving, and their journey was far from over. Yet he pressed on, determined, unyielding, carrying the child and the fragile hope that even in a land ruled by violence, courage could carve a path forward, one step at a time. Ethan Granger pressed forward through the dense grove, the child clutching his coat, small fingers digging into fabric like anchors to hope. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, a strange relief after the dust and smoke of the valley. Every step was careful, deliberate, the ground uneven, roots twisting like the hands of the past trying to trip him. Yet he moved forward, knowing the West would not wait for hesitation. Shadows stretched long beneath the trees, shifting with the wind, carrying whispers of danger he could not ignore. Hours passed in tense silence, the child finally quiet, her small head resting against his chest. Ethan's eyes scanned every ridge, every hollow, every flicker of movement that might betray an ambush. He had learned the West punished the slow, the fearful, and the careless. Ahead, a river glimmered faintly through the trees, silver against the undergrowth, a promise of water, a lifeline. Ethan led the child down to the bank, dipping hands into the cool flow, letting the child drink cautiously, her eyes wide with wonder and relief. They did not linger. Movement on the far bank, a shadow among shadows, reminded him that safety was never certain. Ethan gritted his teeth, mounting the horse, the child secured, and pressed onward, following the river downstream, each step measured, each heartbeat a prayer. The landscape opened to rolling hills, dry and unforgiving, yet dotted with clusters of scrub and rock that offered cover. Ethan guided them along the hidden paths, aware that eyes might watch from every ridge, that rifles could appear where he least expected. Night fell again, pale and cold, stars flickering above like distant witnesses to their struggle. They found shelter in a shallow canyon, the walls high, enclosing them from sight, the air dry and silent. Ethan built a small fire, keeping the glow minimal. The child curled against him, whispering questions he did not answer. Questions about safety, about the past, about the future. He whispered assurances, promises he would keep if he could, vows of protection, courage, and survival. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of smoke, a reminder that danger never rested, that the West was alive, watching, waiting. Morning came gray and thin, light stretching across the hills in sharp angles. Ethan rose, adjusting the child, scanning the horizon. Figures moved far off, men on horseback, scouting, patrolling, tracking. His jaw tightened. There would be no rest until the threat was gone. He pressed onward, following hidden valleys, moving like a shadow, the child trusting him implicitly. Hours passed, each step heavy, each mile a test of endurance and will. Ahead, he spotted a settlement, a small cluster of buildings, smoke rising in lazy spirals. Perhaps allies, perhaps more danger. Ethan approached cautiously, eyes scanning every doorway, every ridge, every movement. Men moved among the buildings, rifles glinting, faces obscured by hats and scarves. He crouched, adjusting the child, heart hammering, mind calculating. Every instinct screamed danger, yet hope flickered faintly in the gray light. He could see a figure moving among them, the one he had been hunting, the architect of chaos, the man who had taken so much. Ethan's pulse surged. The child's small hand pressed against his chest, grounding him, reminding him why he fought, why he had survived this far. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and moved forward, shadows among shadows, the West itself holding its breath. Every step brought him closer, every heartbeat louder in his ears, until at last he confronted the man, rifle leveled, eyes locked. Silence fell, thick and heavy, carrying the weight of all that had happened. "It ends now," Ethan said, voice low, steady, unyielding. The man's smirk faltered as realization dawned, and the West held its breath, waiting. In that moment, everything converged. Fear, courage, loss, hope. And Ethan Granger, carrying the child, a symbol of all that was fragile and precious, stood ready to face the final reckoning. The man's eyes widened, fear creeping where arrogance had stood, and Ethan stepped forward, steady, unyielding, the child clinging to him, her small hand a reminder of everything worth fighting for. A single shot rang out, echoing across the valley, and the chaos of the past weeks seemed to freeze in that heartbeat. The man fell, and for the first time in days the West was silent, save for the whisper of the wind through the trees and the soft murmur of the river nearby. Ethan lowered his rifle, heart pounding, chest heavy with exhaustion and relief. He looked at the child, her eyes wide but trusting, and a small, fragile smile appeared on her lips. The sun broke through the clouds, bathing the valley in golden light, soft and forgiving, as if the world itself had exhaled. Ethan lifted the child, holding her close, and whispered, "We made it. We're free." She laughed softly, a sound that echoed through the canyon, bright and clear, like a promise of tomorrow. Together they walked toward the horizon, the desert behind them, the future ahead, each step carrying the weight of loss, the strength of courage, and the quiet miracles of survival. In the heart of the unforgiving West, they had found something the land rarely offered: hope. And as the sun rose higher, casting warmth over scarred earth and broken towns, Ethan Granger knew that no matter the darkness they had faced, the light they carried forward would always endure. Soft, but unstoppable. Like the whisper of wind over endless plains. Like the heartbeat of life that refused to be silenced. And somewhere in that endless horizon, the West seemed to bow to their courage, carrying their story in the rustle of leaves, the rush of rivers, and the golden glow of dawn. A reminder that even in the harshest lands, hearts brave enough to fight could always find a way to shine.